Alright everybody, we are in the final video of the local adjustments using the mask function in Lightroom. So the last tools that we are going to cover, if we click the mask tool, oops, I already had it selected, was select subject and select sky. So we're going to talk about these, why they're useful, when they're not going to be useful, and how to use them. So select subject, pretty straightforward. Both of these are new to Lightroom. They are tools that were developed in Photoshop and are still used in Photoshop with quite an amount of frequency. So, right, we have this photo right here of a balancing rock on Lee's Ferry Road on the Arizona border to Utah. And if I just go and hit select subject, you're going to see the magic of this tool. So I'm going to hit select subject. It says detecting subject, and boom, that's the selection it made right there. Now I have the overlay on black, but if I go to color overlay, that's the selection right there. Did a pretty good job of making that selection. I can go over to the invert button and select everything except for the subject or the subject, right? Now, it didn't do a perfect job because, right, we see down here, the mask gets a little bit weak down there. But remember, we always can go add, grab the brush, make the brush a little smaller, and kind of paint that in, right? So that looks pretty good. So with, one click of a button and maybe a little bit of brush touch up, we just made this really, this really detailed selection here. So I think that's a really useful tool, right? So now if we click the overlay off, I could then go and change the exposure of the thing, right? And sometimes that helps to see where the mask is, if there's any areas that are a little weak. I'm going to change the exposure. I'm going to open up the shadows. This is also a really useful tool. This select subject tool. Let's just go back up here and let's invert it. Actually, let's go back to the mask. Oops, sorry. Mask, and I'm going to go invert mask 1. So now the background is what's masked and the foreground is not. I just know that there's a lot of you that like to make photos where something is color and then everything else is black and white. This is how you could do it, right? So using that tool, we could then go and click. Oops, what's going on here? What have I got going on here? My mask. I'm going to go take saturation and click saturation down. Sorry, I didn't have my mask selected, so if I select that, we now see, I'm not going to float over that, we now see that we now have this color rock with everything else black and white in the photo. I just know that that's something that a lot of people have, a lot of students have liked to do in this class before, is like make images that are black and white with one color thing in it. So let's go to this photo of my wife, right? We could do the same thing here, right? We could go up here, we could go mask. Let's see how good it does selecting the subject, create new mask, select subject, detecting subject. Did a really good job. We could go invert, so it's everything else, and then we can take the saturation of everything else and bring it down. So then we have this image that is a color version of my wife in a black and white world. So that's how you could do that really easily with the select subject tool. The other thing, remember, you can always do it, right? If you didn't want to do that, let's bring this mask back here. So bring the saturation up. Let's just edit it so that, right, we're going to saturate the background, make this background really saturated. And now let's say that we want to, so we edited everything except for this rock in that mask. But remember, you can always go and click on the 3 buttons here and hit duplicate and invert mask. So, oops, I think I just hit, let me Command Z that. Sorry, I just said invert mask 1, duplicate and invert mask. And now we have the opposite, where I'm going to go now and unclick the show overlay, and now I could go and edit just the rock differently than the background around it, right? So if we go before and after, that's a pretty huge change to this photo. That's select subject. Now I'll show you, I just showed you a good example of when it works really well. Let me show you an example of when it works less well. right? So if we go to, let's see here, what photo? How was I? Let's see, give me one sec here. This photo right here, say. So this is the photo that we did, the gradient, the linear gradient on to change the sky and the landscape. Now, in this photo, I don't remember, the way that these tools are working, they're using artificial intelligence. You're asking Lightroom to analyze your image and tell you what the subject is. I don't necessarily think that's always the smartest thing to do because Lightroom doesn't have a brain, and asking it to decide what the subject is not necessarily always beneficial because sometimes it's not super apparent, such as in this photo. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a good photo by any means either, but let's just go and say create new mask, and I'm going to go select subject. Now it's going to analyze it, and it's going to say, oh, right here is the subject, right? So the way that select subject works is it's artificial intelligence that analyzes the information in the image. It gives priority to pixels in the center of the image because, that's typically where some people put the subjects of their photos, is in the center. So it gives priority to these pixels, and then it looks for areas of high contrast. So this is the highest area of contrast in the center of this frame, and so Lightroom is saying this is your subject. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that little area is the subject of my photo. I would say kind of this broader area is the subject of my photo. Let's go and look at another photo where it might be a little bit confusing. Let's go to this image right here. I would say that the Colorado River right here, or specifically these rapids, are the subject of this photo. But let's see. Select subject. Let's see what it grabs. I don't think it grabbed anything, right? So sometimes that's what it'll do. It'll just kind of like not do anything for you because it can't tell what the subject of this photo is because it's not as apparent as like this photo, right? This photo, it's easy for Lightroom to tell using AI what the subject of the photo is. It's looking for high areas of contrast towards the center of the frame. Yep, this rock right here. Perfect. Areas where it's a little bit more confusing, select a subject is not going to work as well. Not a big deal. Remember, we can always use the brush or any of the other tools as well. If you're doing portraits, this is a really useful tool because it'll go in and it'll select every little hair on somebody's head. Right, if we go to the mask of my wife that I did with one click, image on black, we should do maybe image on white here. Sorry, my computer's running a little slow here. There we go. Look how good it selected that mask. Look at like every little feather of her hair has been selected. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. That you wouldn't want to try to brush out every little bit of her hair that's kind of like, hanging out over on this side right here. So select subject is really advanced. That's a really useful tool, especially, like I said, if you're photographing people. Okay, so that is select subject. Let's go to select sky. I'm going to go back to this picture right here. It's pretty straightforward how this tool is going to work. We're going to go create a new mask. We're going to go select sky, and it's detecting the sky, and it selected the sky, right? Then you could go in and you could edit the sky as you wanted it, separate from the landscape. It's also useful because you can invert it. So, right, it's a way to, same thing as like when we edited this image with the linear gradient, right? We could go and let's just delete all these masks, delete all masks, and let's go really easy, select sky. Boom, selected the sky. I'm going to bring the exposure of the sky down, something like that. Maybe bring the highlights, or I'm sorry, the shadows up, the whites down. And now I am going to go and I'm going to click 3 button menu and I'm going to say duplicate and invert. And now we're going to edit the ground separate from the sky. So it's kind of the same way that we worked with the linear gradient, but just using the select sky tool instead. Totally up to you how you use these tools, and if which ones you do use. If we go through the menu once again, I'm just gonna, be honest with you. I use the brush all the time. I would use the select subject, especially for things like, when I photograph my dog, when I photograph my wife, any of that stuff, just because it does a really good selection of that stuff. And I would use select sky. Those are kind of the three that I use the most. But I like to know all of them, so that's why I want you to know them as well. They all can be useful, but you're going to find the ones that you kind of use the most. I hope you found all of this stuff useful. This is seriously the most powerful stuff you can do with Adobe products, is these like selections. These tools, Adobe Lightroom, Photoshop, all that stuff, are tools of selection. They're tools of making selections and changing your photos. Pretty dramatically too, right? If we look at this photo and go before and after, we made some pretty big edits to a lot of these photos using these masks. So I hope you found this useful, and let me know if you have any questions.